Most companies don't have a revenue problem. They have a structural integrity problem. I'm David Figueroa, president of Primetime Systems. This is the Revenue Integrity Gap, where executive leaders get honest about what's actually breaking underneath the growth. Let's get into it. Today we're unpacking some very important concepts around what's important to a chief revenue officer. Lance Hodgson is the chief revenue officer at SiteMate, where he was originally the company's first go-to-market hire about 8 years ago. Lance began his journey in the marketing and growth. His efforts helped scale the business from startup to a multi-million-dollar global enterprise. Lance's experience and journey should provide an immense value to you as he leads a full GTM organization around the globe. Hey, Lance, thanks for joining today. How are you today?
Good, thanks, David.
I cannot complain, Lance. Hey, thank you so much for taking the time. And I was thinking a lot about your journey. And in your role today as CRO, you've worked your way into the executive seat. And that journey, you've probably had some great resources that you thought, man, how do I scale their behavior across my entire organization? You take your star talent and you say, how could I replicate that and take it across to my average players? Have you faced that?
For employees, like mate, our top performers, how do we scale that performance across the rest of the team?
That performance behavior, yeah. If you think about it, you have like superstar reps. You look after many sellers. Nonetheless, the behaviors you're looking at and you say, well, how do I take my top performers' behaviors and try to replicate that and influence my average performers and even those who may be perhaps not performing at that level? How do I take those great components, traits, attributes, characteristics, and influence others to try to do the same?
Focusing on the recruitment process first is a good place as well, ensuring that the people coming into the org have that kind of like base level ability. So that's always, we kind of look at that as well. It's not just about how quickly people scale from there, but yeah, how they come in is pretty indicative typically of where they go from there. So I think we've gotten better at recruiting over the years by having like a more engineered process, like pattern matching on people who were successful and tying that back into the recruitment process. The other part, we have an internal value called everything engineered. And the way that I would think about it in terms of applying the purpose of the value really is to lift the floor. So your top performers, for the most part, are probably going to be top performers, whether or not they have a lot of like process in place, frameworks, playbooks, they just kind of get it, right? We spend a lot of our time on building basically like an operating system, which is filled with playbooks kind of at the top level, frameworks below that, and operating principles. And they're kind of distilled from what we've learned over the last 10 years, but also what we see from top performers as well. So we take from kind of ourselves and the early learnings, and as well as more recent reps, and we kind of apply that into a set of global best practice, global principles that people can actually pull off the shelf, right? So they live in process flow diagrams, the playbooks, frameworks, single slides that they can refer to with decision-making patterns. So that's really helpful. And then what those people are doing, right? So as an example, we have a closed one agent, which basically analyzes each of our closed ones in a Slack channel and posts the exact sequence of events that person took to win the deal, essentially. And not just generic, but it's broken into sections as well, where they aligned with our operating principles, where they aligned with our playbooks, where they aligned with our frameworks, and then specific tactics that got the deal closed. It can learn from the best people because they're seeing what are the details of that closed one. So that also ties back into the playbooks and frameworks, which then get updated. So it's kind of a system that feeds itself. But the way I think about it is like you want to give mid-level performers as much exposure to what top-level performers are doing as possible, like in detail, and then lift the floor through process improvement, basically, which for us takes the form of playbooks, frameworks, etc.
Yeah, I love that. And that's actually really interesting where you're actually taking activity records and step by step right through the sales process to understand what a closed one looked like. And how do you take those performance indicators, whatever those movements are, and say, okay, well, this activity separated my elite seller from my average seller because they did, you tell me. Love to understand that.
Yeah, I think you just try to unpack it through the data. So understand there's only so many variables. Sales is nuanced, like why someone closes better than another can be quite detailed. It's probably one of the most frustrating things about rep differences. Like, well, why does that person close more? Like, sometimes it doesn't even look like they're doing better, but they close more.
Make it so easy for that guy.
But that's sales, right? Like it's dynamics as
Right.
well. So there's a bit of an intangible
Understand.
part of it. But yeah, try to isolate the variables between the people who are performing well. We also do like our managers and directors and myself as well, we stay really close to the sales process. So we think of our managers, leaders as player managers. So they even have targets as an example. And what that does is it keeps them close to like what's driving deals as well, right? Rather than kind of sitting above and saying like, this is going to work, that's going to work. If you're in it and you're experiencing what closes deals, then it's a lot easier to speak to it and apply it across reps. And then is just trying to understand and isolate the variables and say like, this is clearly where this person is strong and this is having an impact on demo to close percentage or deal size, or whatever variable it is.
Yeah, that's great. So keeping close, right? That connectivity allows the intrinsic nature of what's instinct and what's
Yeah.
behavioral that's taking place and shaping that deal to close one. When I hear engineering earlier with AI, those are almost systematic, right? Well, we did this, and then we had this call time,
Mm-hmm.
there was this response
Yeah.
time. They said this objection, we did this response, or three dimensional. When you look at that data, when you look at your rep behavior and their performance, where did you look in your growth? Because you guys have grown significantly over a short period of time. Where did you look for indicators that show that the risk are there relating to the behavior? And this is not something you always see in your dashboard,
Mm.
right? That's not going to show up in
Mm-hmm.
your activities or your closed one, your pipeline or funnel. What other indicators did you look
Do
at?
you mean like person level risk, as in the person is not growing as expected and like they're at risk?
No. And talent management, I'm speaking relating directly to pipeline, to deal,
Okay.
to revenue.
Okay. And a risk in an isolated deal or a risk across all of go to market or all of AM?
Yeah, across the whole go to
Yeah.
market, the whole GTM engine,
The data does tell like a pretty full story, I think, for trends, which is what we're talking about here. Like, spotting risk, I think, is like there's a tangible trend, and maybe it's only a signal, but like the signal is important. And then you monitor the trend until it gets to the point where you kind of take action. So I think trend wise and like, risk overall, that data is going to tell a pretty good story. It's not, you need to make sure that your reporting is capturing enough information. Like, demo to close in isolation is not going to be enough, right? It's going to have to be demo to close and then like the nature of the leads coming through and like win rates. And like, obviously you need to have segments.
engagement,
Yeah.
right?
And also like with the asterisks that like, what did we change internally that could have
Right.
also impacted that as well?
Yeah.
Like, what's changed in the macro level environment, which we try not to focus on because it's outside of our control anyway. But yeah, I think the data tells a pretty full story. And then the other element of that is discretion, context, understanding. I think me and Hartley, who's CEO and co-founder, that's where time at a company is also super helpful because you can fill those little nuanced gaps that if you've seen everything evolve, you kind of take the data and you can apply a lot of context on customer environment, like cyclical changes or whatever. So yeah, I think it's just a combo of that kind of ability to understand that there is detail that's probably not in there, but we're pretty heavy on reporting. We do end of month audits on all of our go to market data across every stage of the funnel. So each end of month we review that. Obviously we do quarterly reporting. So yeah, I think a lot of it does come back to really good cadenced reporting as well, which is a forcing function for actually reviewing the data pretty regularly.
Today's episode is brought to you by SiteMate.com. The future of construction, infrastructure, and the built world begins on the front line. SiteMate helps teams replace paperwork, disconnected systems, and manual processes with intelligent tools built for the people doing the work. From safety and quality to field reporting, equipment, and operational workflows, SiteMate brings frontline activity into one governed, auditable platform. With AI-powered automation, mobile-first tools, and seamless integrations, teams can capture better data, reduce administrative work, and make faster, more informed decisions across every project and site. Bring your AI strategy to the front line and give your teams technology designed for the real world. Learn more or request a demonstration at sitemate.com. And I think the historical antidotes that you just added are super heavy, right? That's not something just to look behind or look past. I mean, the fact that you're able to understand the trends and the tendencies shaped across your ICP, the personas, your customers, and they also have a bit of a shape and a tendency. Therefore, your sellers and your business needs to operate mended to whatever it is that you're trying to identify according to this particular persona. So I also believe that AI, I want to kind of go into that with you a little bit, Lance. When we start to think about technology, and you guys are a technology company, right? You've talked about some of the stuff that you guys are building and super phenomenal. And that's not just the external tools that you have into the marketplace. Internal tools are fantastic. And for our listening audience, I think there is a lot of noise in the marketplace. The options around AI are becoming quite significant. And the confusion is what to automate and how to automate. And when we start to think about coaching and behavior, performance relating to your revenue model, AI does give us the ability to measure. But the question is, are we able to measure the causality itself? Are we able to understand more than just the pipeline and more than just the activity? Or how do we shape and functionally help AI give us deeper rationale that reports back into our operating model? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think like in go to market at the moment, like we've kind of bucketed our like go to market agents into a few categories. One of them is like coaching agents, which is basically like their role is to coach reps against our frameworks, playbooks, OPs, right? So like we're getting real time, effectively, just after feedback on like what reps are doing. So that's like inputs, right? It's like what is the
Hmm.
when someone comes out of a demo, they get like coaching agent feedback. The manager and like myself, we see that straight after the call. So we're not kind of like waiting for AI to do the analysis. Like in aggregate, you're losing a lot of detail if you're waiting to look through 150 demos or 200 demos, like ask Claude to analyze the last 200 demos. To me, one of the most important things is frequent signals from AI, right? So it's like
Hmm.
broken down. It's like I see 3 or 4 demos per day from my team, and the coaching agent is analyzing those demos. I'm pattern matching from all of those as well, right? So it's basically on the back of actual interactions, the coaching agents basically provide instant feedback and also instant visibility to us of what's happening. So that's like coaching agents. We have intelligence agents who kind of support with details of ops, accounts, like understanding what to do next kind of thing. Collateral agents as well. So collateral agents are basically, what they sound like. So producing go-to-market collateral. So humans, don't have to spend as much time doing that admin side of things. And then the workflow agents basically like streamline process for, for individuals in the team as well. So yeah, I think every like the way I think about it is I feel like we've had a pretty practical application of AI into go to market. Like if you think about the buckets, it's like what do reps need? Well, they need coaching. So like instead of managers having to do all the coaching, have AI support on coaching against our standardized playbooks, frameworks. Intelligence agents, what else do managers often need to do? Well, they need to steer on, like what to do next in the deal. Agents can support with that with the context of managers. Workflow, like, well, why have people doing admin that they don't have to do anymore when the agents can do that for them?
Right,
So like
right,
that's an obvious one.
right.
But that's also typically like the one that, everyone's kind of thinking about and potentially they're missing like a bucket as well. So I think we've just tried to fill those gaps. And then the managers now, like the role of a manager has changed and they're fitting between those gaps and applying human discretion to those things, right? So we created like kind of a manager in
Hmm.
the go-to-market AI era framework, which is like how management has changed in this era because it used to be a lot of like pipeline reviews as an example, right? Going in manually doing pipeline reviews. Well, an agent can run a pipeline review and then the manager sits, just reviews the pipeline review and says like, here's where you should spend your time, right? In the
Hmm.
context of that
Hmm.
rep, in the context of, XYZ. So instead of doing the grunt work and like doing the pipeline review, going into the weeds, looking at that, that's surfaced by the agent, but you still want a manager actually saying like, okay, well, based on this, like this is where we need you to spend your time as an example. So yeah, I think it's super interesting the way it's evolving. Obviously every company has a slightly different approach, but I'm pretty happy like in go-to-market at the moment. It feels like a real, practical application of AI that we're getting a lot of value from.
What's really interesting what you said it was the coaching AI. Do you compound that? So after post deal, post mortem, or post win, or post loss, or post conversation, do you compound those insights to understand
Mm.
trends? And then the next question that I have on the back end of that is when you get those compounding, if indeed you do, I'll assume you do, once you get that compounding insight, what do you do with that in terms of your operating model? How does that go back upward to your strategic and operating model for the business?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it comes back to like, yes, you can get aggregated insights. I mean, that's the great thing about doing the constant reviews, because then it's easy to ask the LLMs to just review those individual feedback patterns, right? So it's like, here's 100 of these where you've actually broken it down in detail. Now, like, what's the aggregated patterns here? So it's pretty easy because we're getting the data every day or whatever it is. So yeah, that bit's pretty straightforward. And then once you get those insights, which here it's probably like rep level, potentially a different action, but like if we're thinking about like global process level insights, then you need it. If we go back to our operating system, top level go to market operating system, obviously like a strategy layer, but sitting beneath that is playbooks, frameworks, and then operating principles, which sit across those things. And I wrote an internal blog about this with an operating system is like AI is basically accelerating companies who have an operating system because you've got
True, so true.
because
That is
you've
so
got
true.
something to feed it back into. So like it
Exactly.
was funny, for 6-7 years, like we spent all this time like documenting things, frameworks, playbooks, and it's kind of sad
Right.
because there was no real forcing function for people to actually follow them.
Like an artifact in a wiki, right? It's just sitting there. You have to search
It's
for it.
supposed to be used, but how can
Yeah.
it be enforced, right? It couldn't be.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
now with the agents, you actually can enforce your operating system and you can enforce the playbooks and frameworks because the
Yeah.
agents can analyze it. You feed it into the agent and you say,
Right.
this is our demo framework, right? After every call, review how our reps are going against our demo framework. That's easy for an
Love
LLM to
that.
do, right? Now a rep
Yeah.
comes out and they get reviewed on their alignment to the demo framework. And you couldn't do that previously at scale, right? Like I can't be in every meeting,
Right.
even managers can't be in every meeting. Now you can be.
Right.
I think most of it comes back to, we're like very kind of full on about like having IAs, so information architecture diagrams about a lot of the stuff internally. That documentation, like when you get those insights, you're feeding it back into something, number one. So you're feeding it back into
Mhm.
the playbook or feeding it back into the framework, but you're also feeding it back into the operating system architecture. So like when something is not going well in go to market, as an example, I kind of know whether it should be like a playbook, a framework, an operating principle, or something else like, tactical or like support the managers with it. So
Interesting.
to me, without the operating system architecture, what do you do? What are you updating? Right?
Right. Which is what's happening today, Lance. And when you're saying operating system, and I think operating system and operating model are intrinsically
Yeah.
tied, right? We're saying the same thing differently. But you're right. What many leaders today, I think, are not necessarily thinking about is the operating
Yeah.
system, right? A lot of the things that you talked about were execution related, right? They're just kind of turning the wheel really, really fast, much quicker, depending on the amount of scale and the depth of the selling team, as well as the middle layer, which is middle
Yeah.
management. But I think that's exactly right. We're executing, a lot of folks are executing first and solving the automation
Yeah.
task without having the
Yeah.
OS, right?
Yeah. The internal blog was called Scaling Up Sitemate's Operating System. And again, we were lucky because when AI came into play, when it became a thing that we really started to see the value of, it wasn't immediately obvious, but it didn't take us long to see just how it fit into our operating system. What is the operating system? Documenting that, because without the interesting thing about it too is like without documenting it, it's actually hard. Like we talked about the buckets of agents in go to market, without documentation and being able to visualize it, like how do you create your buckets of agents? Like where do they sit in your process flows? Like what job are they doing? What are
Exactly.
they replacing?
And what's the
Yeah, what's
value?
the value? Where do they sit, in whatever it is?
What's it?
To me,
Yeah.
it comes back to clear documentation and then you just insert agents where they make sense and either remove, manual admin or augment a person or supplement a manager or whatever it is. It's kind of easy once you document it versus just like, let's just create agents, right? Which is a bit directionless.
That's right. And it provides you metrics, right? Because we all know there's summaries and the amount of processing speeds that AI can deliver. But when we start to think about the metrics that it's actually producing, there could be a little bit of a trap where it's producing you metrics which may not have any relative and back to your OS, your operating model, or what your strategic drivers
Yep.
are. So yeah, I get to see deal performance. Yeah, I get to see the calls and how many demos and what the conversion rate and all that stuff. But what I really want to see is how that influences my growth and how that influences my strategy, my operating model. What am I actually trying to deploy today and this year, next year? And how can this accelerate that, not just kind of erode behavior or erode bad behavior?
Yeah, totally. And I think it's there is the ability to get so much data now, but it's faster, easier now. But yeah, you need a mechanism for like, okay, here's the data, here's the output, and then how do you take that and improve outcomes, improve results? But that's pretty much directly tied to what we're talking about here with
The OS.
governance, like whatever it is. It's like,
Yep.
how do you tie that back in? Well, like you need artifacts, you need something to actually insert the change into. So, yeah, I think a lot of companies, it's tricky. I think for us, our ability to do it does come down to our values, like our company values, which all kind of tie together to create an environment where it's not just kind of encouraged to follow process, a part of the operating model. Like everything's highly visible, like high vis is one of our values. So everything kind of gets seen. So then you can't really hide away and have your own process because if everything's seen, then for the most part, you can see what's going on. Everything engineered, which basically means being intentional and systematic about process versus people doing all their ad hoc stuff. So I think we did a good job creating values that align with the idea of creating an OS and kind of having governance by default. And that's enabled us to scale reasonably well. Still very hard, even with all of that in place. So I can't even imagine how hard it is without that.
But that is part of this era, which I believe that leadership today needs to be very cognizant of what is coming and where we are. Quite frankly, before you even pull the trigger on AI, think of your operating model, think of the strategy, diagnose what that might be, what is the value that you're going to drive to, then execute. Sounds like SiteMate and Lance, you particularly you guys are sophisticated, probably way further down the road, but that's also because you're an AI solution as a business. So much of our listeners are probably encroaching on some of the concepts about today. What would you suggest for leaders to think about relating to the AI beyond automation?
Beyond automation, so as in like beyond kind of like those workflow agents, etc.
Yeah, so what AI is being positioned to right now is really, to your point, you said some very, very good things, augmentation, right? Some other key terms that you had mentioned. I think those are the concepts that people really need to understand because automation is fairly table stakes.
Yeah, I think it depends what you mean by automation. Like to me, automation, like if we go back to our buckets of agents in go-to-market, to me, automation is like the workflow agents, right? Which is like automating process. So like you get out of a demo, the demo recap email is drafted. That to me is automation. I don't think any of our other buckets really, I mean, okay, so collateral agents, automation, workflow agents, automation, but intelligence agents and coaching agents, to me, coaching agents are like, it's not automation, right? It's like you're approaching it in a different way. I think most people, to your point, and it's actually something I grappled with a little bit because like when I worked more closely on the revenue team side, which is like RevOps, go-to-market ops, building the systems, we used to use Zapier and build the automation. Like it was, if this happens, then this. Yeah. That's automation. And, AI initially, that was kind of the thinking too. The difference that I've realized, and it's funny because at the start, I actually didn't like the word agent. I was just like, oh my God, it's just an automation. Like, why are we calling it an agent? Like, it's just an automation, right? So it took me a journey to kind of come through this. And I think the difference and the reason I like the word agent now is it is genuinely doing the work that someone else used to do, but not just moving information from here to there, but the discretionary work, right? Like applying context and detail. To me, it moves past automation because it's able to deliberate, right? Like a person. I live in Austin at the moment, Austin, Texas, and the Waymos, right? It's so funny because a lot of the Waymo stuff like doesn't, it's awesome, but it's like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. But when you see it at a busy intersection, using judgment to pull out,
Stop, go,
boy,
left.
it's crazy.
Yeah. Halfway out.
It's like, oh, like, should I go?
Yeah.
Right? That's the difference between, AI and automation. Is like it's the ability to deliberate and, quote unquote think, right? Like, so I that's like a good analogy for it. It's like that car, that's the bit that blows me away. That's what I would do, right? I'm not an automation. I'm not moving from A to B. That's how I would
Right.
think about it. And that's the decision making process I would go through. So I think it's just able to do much more of this coaching analysis, not just analysis on data, but analysis on obviously language and things that are being said and all these details. But to me, it's like the difference is an automation is like, if this, then that. And AI is like, if this, do this work that a human being kind of used to have to do, then that, right? And like, then that maybe the human gets back in the loop or whatever it is. So yeah, it's fascinating. And, we're kind of constantly, where I used to, like, something would happen, I'd be like, oh, let's build an automation for that. But like, I knew the dead end. Now something happens and we can build an automation for it and there's no dead end, right? Like you can really like close the loop on that
Keep
process.
going.
Yeah.
Exactly. Lance, thank you. So, for listeners that are maybe in a different part of their career, and like yourself, you've grown through your career starting from a different level and worked your way up into an executive seat. What do you believe is the next generation of CRO, and what should they be prepared for thinking about in terms of what needs to be true for the future?
Yeah. I'd say you'd have to ask Hartley if this is true, but I'd say that like where I feel like I'm a more well equipped CRO because of AI, versus other people or just in general is I think previously the CRO could like be a good seller and or like in isolation, that would be enough. Is like, sales tactics, that side of things. I think the next generation of CRO, same as like marketing, I have a marketing background. It's like I think it's very similar. You have to be a systems thinker. It's not enough to be a good seller. Like you have to be able to think in systems. And it goes back to our operating model. It's like thinking in systems, like layers, architecture. I think that's important. But I feel like if you can't think in systems, it's more like an engineering mind, right? Like that's kind of what it's becoming.
So agree with you, man.
It's like,
Totally agree.
yeah, it's more of an engineering mind where it's like, okay, how does this feed back into process? And like, how can we use agents to fill these gaps? So yeah, I think like my time at Time 8, built Salesforce in the early days for us, like all of those little things that I didn't think were necessarily going to be helpful, they've created like a layer or like a level of thinking where like I don't think about the individual necessarily. I go to the process and the system. That's where I go to and you try to fix that. And then if you fix that well, then you don't just fix an individual. Hopefully you can scale that across 30 reps, 50 reps, whatever it is. So I think that to me is the next generation is if you can't apply an individual outcome or back to a systems layer, operating system, governance layer, I think you're going to be an enterprise AE basically versus a CRO.
In fact, so much so that not long ago I had spoken at an event, and one of the things that I spoke to that room is a room full of CROs was simply around I believe that this role is transformative. I think it's no longer going to be an active executive sponsor with design around teams relating to my GTM model and my pipeline accelerators and sales process regimen. It's really going to be more about
Yeah.
systems. Like, how can we do more? Perhaps even with less, but how can we accelerate around an operating principle that aligns to the strategic elements that are necessary for the business to achieve its growth goals or its whatever it is that the strategic goals are put in place, whether it's 1, 3, 5 year outline or horizon. And when we start to think about what the CRO shape starts to look at, you are the front line to deployment. You're the front line to maintaining and sustenance of that. You're the owner. You're the accountable member. And then from there are waterfalls, right, around your team. But I totally agree with you. The next level needs to have an engineering mindset so that all of the parts and pieces and the components are true in order to make the entire machine function.
Well, yeah. And if you think about the agents, we probably have like maybe like 20, 25 like kind of specific agents online and go to market. So the operating system is more complex than it ever was as well,
Yeah.
because we have many human beings. We have agents, we have tools, we have automations. Like, if you can't think through and understand, and architect how the pieces should fit together between those things, like, it's going to be a mess. And in fact, it's probably going to be messier than it was, pre-AI era. So I just think it's going to be critical, like, understanding how the pieces fit together. A lot of founders are going back to companies that they left during the AI era because, like, what are they really good at? They're really good at, like, systems architecture and thinking about the company as an organism, that all of the pieces need to kind of work together. So yeah, I think it's being able to see the big picture, understanding the systems, understanding the context. And then, as I said, it's like, if you can't think tools, people, agents, and like how does all of this architect together, then it's tricky to see how you drive the org from the top.
Agreed. And how you grow and how you figure out sustainable
Yeah.
growth. Well, Lance, I want to thank you for your insights, your time, and your willingness to help our community become better leaders. I think your insights were very valuable, your experience quite admirable, and I hope that our listener audience will appreciate the same.
Hopefully.
I want to thank you for your time and have a great
Thanks,
one.
David.
Thanks for tuning into the Revenue Integrity Gap. If this hits home, share it with one executive in your network who needs to hear it. That's how this show grows. This episode is brought to you by Prime Time Systems, where we help revenue organizations close the gap between growth and governed execution. Find out more at prime-timesystems.com. That's prime-timesystems.com. I'm David Figueroa. I'll see you next time.